meeting to order. I'd like to start out by just acknowledging that Supervisor Gibson's appearing remotely. The location was announced on the agenda, so he's with us online. Is that correct?
It is. Thank you very much for that accommodation.
All right, you're welcome. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Roll call, Dan.
Yes, Director Cesena here. Director Gibson
Here.
Director Reinecke
Here.
Chair Zimmer.
Here.
All
Okay.
4 reps present.
Thank you. Okay, item 3, pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I also have another announcement that Supervisor Gibson requested to move the agenda due to his absence and take the action items following our consent agenda before public comment and before the executive director. I think we need a roll call for that, Dan. Is that correct? Or
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, might as well get one.
Okay.
All in favor of adjusting the agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
All against? Okay,
Okay.
motion passes.
Okay, so just for clarity, we're going to take items 9 just after our consent agenda.
Okay.
All right. Moving on, board member comments, item 4. Comments?
Nothing to add.
Just want to make a comment about our town hall meeting. Thought that was well attended and wanted to thank the county for putting that on. Thought there was a lot of good information there and a lot of good questions, comments from the community. Just wanted to acknowledge that that happened and the county did do a really good job, I thought, of putting that town hall meeting together.
You know, I would add my appreciation for the fact that they actually took direct questions from the audience and not just pulled from cards and then selected from the cards. There was some drawback to that, obviously, there sometimes can be, but they did that, so that was good.
Yeah.
Well, if I could add my thanks for everybody from the BMC's participation. I know several of you were there for the duration of that, and I think it definitely made a big impression on the crowd, which was much bigger than I expected it would be. So good stuff all around, and we're headed toward the 29th.
Yes. Thank you. We'll move to public comment at this time.
If you have public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. We will take public comment in the boardroom first.
No, this
Is
is
this public comment in just one section or?
only on our board member comments at this time.
Yeah.
We'll open it up to general public comment later in the meeting.
You guys vote on the action items? It's confusing.
Yes. So you can comment on the action items before our final vote.
Oh, okay.
You'll have a chance to comment on those. Yeah, yeah. So each item, we'll take public comment on each item, but then there's also a section where you can have open public comment for items not on the agenda. All right. Our public comment that we just made regarding our board member comments, which the only one was the town hall meeting.
Hello, Becky McFarland. I was one of the many people that attended the town hall. And afterwards, I did thank Mr. Gibson for this town hall. And the question and answer was very important. some people estimated there was over 200 people there. I don't know, I didn't count. By the time the question and answer came around, I estimated 20 to 30. So we lost out on all of those people hearing all of those answers. And the promise that those questions and answers would be up on the county website has not come to fruition yet. And it's been over a week. I have emailed planning and asked about that. I re-emailed Blake Fixler and Claire Momberger again today. Those questions and answers need to be out there. Also, yeah, there was a lot of time. There was like 2 hours for questions going around to the different tables, but everybody left. And did they get to hear all those answers? And they're still not up. I really think we need some sort of other meeting. It doesn't have to be as involved, but where the questions and answers can be listened to by a large group of people. It should also be recorded. It's not recorded, so we don't know what questions they wrote down from all the people that asked them afterwards. And there were some really confusing things about the growth management ordinance. You know, I don't know if many people, since they weren't there to hear it, that the 1% really doesn't include the outside the prohibition zone. Like there's some really odd things going on in there. You know, people didn't get to hear that there's no cap to the number of 2-bedroom, 1-bath homes, guest houses. So the reason there were so many people there, we haven't had a meeting like that since when? Since we had the big community plan meetings. So it's important. And also, I know Mr. Gibson's in a hurry, but I think people's public comments should be heard. And I'm hoping he'll pledge to listen to everyone's public comments from this meeting. We have some new people here. And I think he should hear those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Patrick McGibney. Yeah, I agree with Becky on a lot of what she just said. There were almost 250 people there. I did a rough count on that. A lot of attendance, but they all left, as she said. So, but when it got down to the important things of talking and answering questions and listening, most of the people were gone. So they didn't really get to hear. And I did talk to Dan about possibly suggesting that you have a public meeting where people, the community can come, somewhat like we did at the last one, where the community can come and talk to you about what's going on with our basin and have an interplay with you, not just get 3 minutes and then have you comment and then we don't get to say anything about the comments. We'd like to know more about our basin plan, how it's working, what we're doing, and what you guys think about the sustainability of our basin. The community would like to know this from our Basin Management Committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lindy Owen. You know, I didn't even waste my time going to that meeting because I'd already watched 3 other presentations from the county on it. So I had the gist of it. What's really disappointing and what should make us furious, it was not filmed. If you happen to be out of town or you didn't happen to hear about the meeting, you will never know all the details and the answers and information that was brought forward and brought ahead. You're not going to know it. We begged the county to film it. In the past, they've all been filmed. There's a reason for it. It's public education. This county is doing everything it can to just save money and get away with the least amount of information to our public. It's disgusting. I am so tired of watching it go downhill and disappear. We're now going to start cutting employees at county planning. You know what that's going to mean? All these permits are going to go through with nobody really looking at them very carefully. There's such a loss of information and expertise in our county at this point. So between the fact that we are trending towards a sustainable supply instead of actually just looking, you know, year by year to see where this is going, we're going to see a lot of new growth. And this meeting, there's no excuse for all the important years, 30 years worth of information that was finally approved and moving forward. It should have been filmed, and it should be clear as a bell to anybody that wants to find out. They should not have to go to the county and get bad information, which is kind of what's happening now.
There are no further public comments in the boardroom or online.
Okay, thank you. Um, well, I think much of what I just heard there lies with the county. It was the county's meeting. It's the county's, so, our role here is really the basin management, and there is a nexus there. I don't want to say that it's separate, but we do get involved in that. I think, overall, our basin management plan and our annual report is the time to go through and really look at our basin and have that overarching meeting. But I think, almost every meeting, we talk about the basin and what's happening in the basin and what our goals and objectives are. And this meeting is recorded. So I think there is an avenue for people to get the information that they're seeking. And at that public comment time is the time to bring that back to us. And if it's not on the agenda, that's the time to really come back and talk about it. So,
Thank you for that, Mark. I would say, in reference to what Lindy said, filming that kind of thing and making it available for watching later is the easiest thing to educate the public. And you don't have to worry about questions and answers being posted online because it's there. I mean, that's the way you do that kind of thing. And I would have to say, if there's one thing that should have been done differently, that I think was it. And maybe there could have been a little less time at the individual booths. It did seem like a lot of people did leave by the time the questions and answers really rolled around. But anyway, that's, done now.
Yep.
But I agree that every meeting we're in here talking about what we're doing, the steps that we're taking. There should be no surprises about what this committee's doing.
okay, thank you. All right, we'll close item 4. Item 5, special presentation. There are none. We'll move on to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda, we have our 2024 financial report. And then we also have the minutes from the September 25th special BMC meeting.
Yeah, nothing particular to note in this consent agenda, just as you described, financials and meeting minutes.
Okay. If there's no questions, we'll move to public comment.
Lindy Owen again. I liked it at the beginning. Dan used to put everything into the agenda packet, and that included the minutes. And it's not that I'm lazy, but it is time consuming to have to stop, shut down my computer, go to the county site to look up the minutes. So I just wonder if we could go back to just having those all attached into the agenda packet that you usually put out. Am I wrong that
Yeah, I think they're
you used
included
to
in the
have
packet.
everything in there? It was really wonderful just to be able to kind of go, oh, here, I'll run down here. Oh, there it is. I could read it. It was all in one place. So just wondering if we could go back to that style of presentation. And then I tried to open up, I was going to stay home because I'm not feeling well, and I could not open up the Zoom. So that address tells me I need to go through a Zoom tutorial or something. So I'm not sure if it's just me, but just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Do we have other folks online through the Zoom?
Yeah,
Yes.
I use the Zoom link in the agenda packet.
All right. How many people are on Zoom?
We have 13 people on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. And then the minutes are posted on page 12 of the packet. They're included in the packet too. Yeah, I think the agenda comes as one sheet and then the packet comes as a second sheet. So, yeah.
Yeah, typically, and Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, we typically on the website, and I think we post the agenda, which is just a quick 1-2 pager, and then as a separate hyperlink, the agenda packet, which includes the agenda and then all of the attachments. And that it should be available. Actually, one thing to note is that actually, thanks to Jamie's efforts, we've hopefully improved the agenda packet with footers that have page numbers, both for the full agenda and for the item that those documents are referring to. So hopefully it's a little easier to navigate. And also, I think if you're looking at it on your computer, the footer can act as a hyperlink to go back to the agenda page.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll bring it back to the board. Motion,
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
aye.
All opposed? Motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Here's where we're gonna make our jump. We're gonna move action items 9A, B, and C. So we'll start with action item A, LA 14, LA 16 groundwater monitoring well rehabilitation contract award.
Sorry, I'm trying to see if I can get the buzzing to stop. All right. There you go. If I hold it, it seems good. Okay. Yes. Item 9A, we've talked about this a bit at previous meetings. So really the request here is today is that we have authorized the Los Osos Community Services District to go out to bid to the LA 14 and 16 modifications. And what the BMC staff is requesting that the BMC authorize the executive director to work with the Los Osos CSD staff to award a contract for those services if those services come within the budget that the BMC established for this project. And the reason we're asking for this pre-authorization is that the bids aren't due until November 1st. And so if we wait till after November 1st, our next regularly scheduled BMC meeting isn't until the third week in November. And so it delays the projects at a minimum 3 weeks. And so this was agenda item was added in an attempt to hopefully streamline the process of getting this project done and getting it done in ideally this calendar year. And so the request really is authorization to move forward with the project if bids come in within the budget. If bids come in higher than that, then we would bring this back to the BMC for their consideration.
Yeah. That process makes sense to me. Any questions on that before we go to public comment? Okay, we'll open action item A to public comment.
If you're in the boardroom and you would like to make a public comment, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. We have no public comment.
Okay, no public comment. All right, bring it back to the board. I'd just like to make a comment. I appreciate the district taking the lead and enabling us to have a mechanism to make this happen. You know, it's part of all of our in-kind contributions that we play to work as a team and get done the items that we need to get done. So this one, I just want to acknowledge the district. I know Ron probably had a lot to do with it, right? So thank you, Ron, and the board for their approval and moving forward. So appreciate that. And then as far as Dan's comment, everybody understands what Dan was saying about if it comes back. We're approving the project now. If it comes back within the bid.
Engineer's estimate. Yeah.
Engineer's estimate. Okay, sounds good.
And well, just one point of a clarification. It technically, if it comes back within the BMC's budgeted amount,
Okay.
Can you go over those
Would
amounts
that
for
be
me real
different? Why
quick?
would that be different than the engineer's estimate?
So we established a budget for this project back a year ago, even before we had the designer. So the engineer's estimate is actually more recent than the budget.
How close are they?
They are within 10,000. I believe the engineer's estimate is 90,000. The budget for the construction the budget estimate for construction was 100,000. It also fits within the CSD has similar kind of authorities and constraints about what they're allowed to approve. So the CSD board, as Chuck, authorized the CSD general manager to execute the contract if it comes in within 20% of the engineer's estimate. So this is a similar process, but we're using the BMC's budget, not the engineer's estimate. Just
Either way, as long as we're budgeted for what the engineer's estimate is, we're in good shape.
Okay. Need a motion?
I'm happy to move staff's recommendation.
I'll
Did we
second
take
that.
public comment on this item?
Yes, we did.
Oh, I apologize.
No, I'll second that.
Okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed? All right, motion passes 4-0.
Or monitoring.
Okay, the second item, action item 9B is the Rose Foundation Central Coast Community-Based Water Quality Grant. Turn it over to Dan to,
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. Yeah, again, this is a very similar item to what we brought forth to the BMC this summer with the request to apply for this grant. We had in the executive director's report for last meeting, early notification of preliminary award of the grant funding for the BMC. And then, so this is really just bringing it back as a formal item to approve the executive director to execute the contract with the Rose Foundation for $150,000 in grant funding for what we're calling the Sweet Springs Monitoring Well. And so that would be a new monitoring well located in relatively close proximity to Sweet Springs Nature Preserve. Would help fill a gap in the BMC's monitoring network between the Pasadena well or LA11 and the Cuesta by the Sea Lupine well LA40/41. Other relevant information, the BMC would need to provide $50,000 in cost share for the $150,000 grant. It's envisioned that that would be included in the calendar year 2025 budget, and $50,000 is less than the BMC has included in their budget for the last 2 years for groundwater monitoring improvements. So sort of in line with those historical budget allocations. The Rose Foundation does have a note that if we don't sign and return the agreement within 60 days, they could remove the grant. And so we're just trying to be responsive to that and just get the BMC's approval before executing that agreement. I would also add that we had BMC legal counsel review the agreement, and they did not identify any concerns or issues with the agreement.
thank you, Dan. Any questions before we go to public comment?
I do have a question. What is the intended schedule for the project to move forward?
It's a good question. The project really can't move forward, if I recall, from the grant application or the grant program requirements until 2025, or at least construction. Yeah. So the intended schedule is roughly 2025, to get the project done within 2025. There's a permitting and encroachment permit process and other things that we need to initiate. Now, thankfully, we've been getting better, more efficient at working through those processes, as this is our sort of fourth groundwater monitoring program improvement project.
And sorry to reference the previous item, but is the schedule for that similar? Would we be seeing that next year?
No, the previous item we're hoping to get done this year. And historically, we've been really constrained about having to get these projects done in the calendar year where we've approved the budget. With the bank account and the new accounting procedures, it's less of an issue, but it's still good to get the funding and get the projects done while you have the momentum. So the goal is to get that project done this year, this project done next year.
Okay, and I think I heard you mention encroachment permit. I was just, my question, do we need easements, encroachment permit? What do we need for the two recommended sites?
It's a good point. The final location really hasn't been identified. It's envisioned that it would go in county right away. And so we would need an encroachment permit and likely an easement from the county for use in that. Yeah, similar to what we obtained for the skyline monitoring well.
Okay, just,
Not a problem.
What we did for LA 14 and 16, we're actually operating under the CSD's blanket encroachment permit, similar to what Golden State has, because they're in the right of way and accessible. If there's any special, like Skyline was a little different because there was some confusion on exactly where the property line was.
yeah.
But typically it's fairly easy to work that through that with the county.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that clarification. I was thinking about the Skyline one and how we got delayed in that process for a little bit till we figured that part of it out. Yeah, okay. And I think I heard a no problem from Supervisor Gibson on the,
Absolutely. I will have concierge service of getting necessary encroachment permits.
all right, I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, no further questions. We'll move to public comment.
If you have public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you're online, please raise your hand. We have no public comment on this item.
Okay, thank you. We'll bring it back to the board for direction.
I move to approve staff's recommendation.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion passes 4-0.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to our third action item, the sustainable yield estimate for calendar year 2025.
Thank you, Chair Zimmer. If the BMC will recall, one of the requirements of the stipulated judgment is for the BMC to adopt a sustainable yield for the upcoming water year before the end of the current year. And so we've brought forth the BMC staff's recommendation for adopting a sustainable yield estimate for 2025 of 2,380. The basis of this recommendation is that the BMC adopted the sustainable yield of 2,380, and back in 2021, when we did an extensive evaluation of our sustainable yield estimate and had kind of identified that it wasn't aligning with what some of the other metrics were telling us. And we modified the criteria a little bit when we did that. So just to remind everybody, the changes in the sustainable yield that occurred in 2021 were really driven by the following four criteria or assumption modifications. One was where we wanted what our threshold for seawater intrusion was. And at the time, the BMC identified it did not want to see intrude any further than the extents that we had seen in 2021, whereas historically the methodology allowed it to intrude past current or further than current extents. So it was an intent to hold the line on seawater intrusion with the sustainable yield estimate. We also updated the estimated development of the Broderson Mound. Previous sustainable yield estimates had assumed it was 100% developed. We modified that to a 50% development assumption because that better fit what we were observing in and around the Broderson leach field. We also updated the assumptions around available infrastructure that could be utilized, i.e. what pump or what wells the purveyors could or would be utilizing to pump groundwater out of the basin, because locations and quantities do impact the sustainable yield estimate. And then finally, we updated the precipitation assumption to incorporate some more recent rainfall data that at the time incorporated several additional drought years that the BMC had experienced. And so the recommendation, so that's what we did in 2021. And so the recommendation is to stay with that sustainable yield estimate for 2025. And the reasons for that is there's no new infrastructure that wasn't already considered in the calculation of that previous estimate that's been constructed or available for utilization by the purveyors. Our best estimates of the Broderson Mound development and long-term average rainfall have not significantly changed since that estimate was developed. And then there haven't been any significant hydrogeologic investigations that would warrant an update to our assumption for sustainable yield that we've undertaken since 2021. And then finally, you know, as the BMC knows, the BMC hydrogeologist is working on a transient model. That model is currently being calibrated, but won't be available for utilization to calculate sustainable yield estimates before the end of the calendar year. And so the staff thought it was prudent to fulfill the requirements of the stipulated judgment and adopt the same sustainable yield for 2025.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. Well, questions?
Yes, in terms of infrastructure, where does the CSD's new program see well, was it taken into account with this sustainable yield estimate, or because it's just about to come online? Does that mean we'd be looking at recalibrating this again? With a year or two of that well being in service, maybe?
Yeah, so we talked about that at the staff level. I believe the current schedule is for that. So the second program C well, the Bay Oaks well, is scheduled to come online in spring of 2025. And so just to be conservative, we didn't want to assume that it would be online. It wouldn't be online for the full duration of 2025. Plus, if there are any supply delivery delays or other delays, we didn't want to assume that infrastructure would be available. So yeah, under this approach, that infrastructure probably wouldn't be incorporated in the sustainable yield estimate until 2026.
Thank you.
I have a question, Dan. Is how close are we with the transient model? Do you kind of mentioned that you think it might be done before the end of the year?
You know, I had a conversation with Spencer Harris today. Yeah, it's in the calibration phase, but it likely won't be published and ready for review before the end of the calendar year. So we would be looking sometime in early 2025 for information on the transient model and the calibration to be made available. And then, you know, from there, we anticipate, you know, there's a peer review process. And so it's likely going to be an extended period of time before we would be able to utilize that new model for an updated sustainable yield estimate.
Thank you. Another question. So we're still calling the Broderson Mound 50% developed. Do you know the basis for that currently?
I mean, it's based on the best available data that we have for water levels in and around the Broderson Mound. It unfortunately we lost a well, which I think is a funny thing to say, but from what I've heard, it's true that there was a well that could be useful in helping us better understand water levels in and around the Broderson Mound, but I think it was either during the Broderson leach field construction or other related activities that well got buried. And so we don't have access. Well, we don't exactly know where it is to be able to access it and get that data. But yeah, so it's based on the best available data that we have for the water levels in and around the Broderson leach field.
Yeah, I would be interested, especially as we're reviewing the sustainable yield each year. It would be, I think, useful to be able to see maybe the calculations that go into what the Broderson Mound I guess how we are figuring that, because if it's going to change year to year, I think knowing the data would be interesting and probably helpful for the public to also understand what that 50% even means, because honestly, I'm kind of having a hard time knowing what it means.
Yeah, so there is information on the annual monitoring report, on the current level of development of the Broderson Mound. Um, you know, as I can best explain it, it's, when the modeling was done for the basin plan and for the water recycling project, there was some assumption for how high that water would mound up before it reached a steady state with, percolation down into the lower aquifer and disbursement, into the upper aquifer. And so for a lot of the sustainable yield calculations that were done historically before 2021, it was assumed that that mound would be fully developed, and that assumption was plugged in as an input to those modeling scenarios. And when we evaluated the methodology in 2021, it was it was identified that, well, we're assuming it's fully developed, but our actual physical observations right now are that it's not. And so is that a conservative assumption or not? And so that's why we made the intent to switch to assume that it's only developed to an extent that matches our current best estimate of how much water has been mounded there. So that's the intent. I'm trying to find where in the annual report it specifically speaks to that, but I believe it is in one of the appendices that talks about the Broderson Mound and its latest estimated level of development.
So just, that's a good question, Beth, and I just wanted to follow up with a additional question on that. So the Broderson Mound, is it developed, our understanding of it through the model or through the monitoring well? Because you mentioned that the monitoring well was taken out of service for some reason, but so were we relying on the monitoring well to develop our understanding of the Broderson Mound, or was it the model?
So we're really relying on both, typically, which is a lot of the management that we do. And when I say both, I don't mean we're not relying on that monitoring well that it currently can't find. That we have other monitor wells in the area that give us data on the level of the development that the mound has occurred. That would just be an additional data point that we could utilize in that assessment. Sorry, it's not necessarily super pertinent to this. We also rely on the model to help us predict what the mound is going to do and how it's going to impact water levels in the upper and the lower aquifer. So yeah, hopefully it answered your question. But we basically were utilizing physical observations from the monitoring wells that we do have access to assess the level of development of the mound.
If I could bump in there, my colleagues on the committee may remember the expenditure of transducers for a variety of monitoring wells that Spencer felt extremely important in terms of characterizing the Broderson Mound. Those got installed over a year ago, maybe coming on 2 years ago. Time flies, and that's the basis on which we are tracking that. And I think what we've got here, without adding the impact of the district's program Seawell or any further development of the Broderson Mound, I think we've got a very conservative estimate with sticking with the 2380 that staff is recommending.
Okay. And weren't we projecting that the Broderson Mound was going to take somewhere in the range of 30 years to develop, or it was a long time out, right? So
we're a long ways from the days they talked about potentially needing harvest wells downstream of the mound.
yeah.
Yeah, my only follow-up question to that, then I guess maybe Dan, if it's 50%, because we've seen it at 50%, has it been the last 3 years now? I don't remember it changing since I've been here, but
Yeah, I mean, the assumption of 50% developed was assumed in the 2022, 2023, 2024, and now it would be the 2025 sustainable yield estimate.
okay, so can I assume that that means that the transducer level has not changed in those years? So we haven't seen a rise in the water levels where those transducers are installed.
I believe we haven't seen a significant rise in the level of where the transducers were installed. And, you know, when we were going through the sustainable yield estimate exercise in 2021, you know, we modeled it at, I believe, if I recall, 50%, 75%, and 100%. And so it's not necessarily something that if it goes up 2%, we want to redo all the modeling. That's a really high level of effort for the, you know, amount of impact that minor changes in the level of the mound would have on the basin.
Okay, my last question. Does the transient model, it should have the capacity to take into account minor fluctuations and like an increase in that well? Would that be a part of the transient model?
Yeah, so the transient model will have the ability to estimate, you know, we wouldn't be required just to pick one level. We can estimate the transition of that and the development of that mound over time on an incremental level, and then evaluate the impacts of that on basin conditions.
Let's go.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, we'll move to public comment.
If you have public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come to the podium. And if you are online, please raise your hand. We will take public comment in the boardroom first.
And it was an order of the agenda items, so I won't keep talking in this order because we changed the agenda. I would like to spend a few seconds, since you don't give me very long to talk here.
How about your name first?
That's what I was just going
All
to
right.
do,
Okay.
introduce myself. Lynette Brooks, 30 years, hydrologist with the USGS, licensed professional engineer since 1990 in Utah and Hawaii, not in California. Developed 9 USGS models using ModFlow LGR, Sutra to model saltwater intrusion from the Great Salt Lake, which intrudes much worse because it's a lot denser than the ocean. Documented the construction and calibration and results of those models. A total of 25 USGS reports, including those. Peer review for 8 other reports, including USGS, state agencies, and consulting firms. Lived in Los Osos for about a year in 2021 and 22. Moved to Arroyo Grande, moved back here in July because we really like Los Osos. Plan on staying somewhere around here. Okay, now back to the part, and now I don't have very long. Sustainable yield. Looking at the chloride and water level metrics, it is not sustainable. And the chloride metric has kind of leveled off, mostly probably because of all of your conservation efforts have reduced the pumping in that closest to the ocean. And those efforts are applauded. The water levels went up last year because it was a really wet year. I have no idea where these dotted lines on this come from. It can't be from the model because the model is steady state. It cannot do timelines. It just has one thing in it. So I don't really know where these lines are coming from. Wherever they come from, the chloride one is, kind of close. The water level one is way off. I mean, we'd have water levels a lot higher than we do right now if this yield was really sustainable. So I think you actually need to develop a new estimate. I guess, the transient model will do that, but, maybe you want to consider it before that. And then the precipitation of 17.3 inches per year may be too high looking at the data. The page 42 of the draft annual report states that the precipitation gauge has a lower average due to a short-term period of record that included 7 years of below normal rainfall. It was 18 years of record. That means it had 11 years of above normal precipitation. And also, usually the median is used for these things, not the average. You lose the really extreme events if you use the median. It's 3 inches lower than the average at that gauge. And if you're really cutting me off, then that's all, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lynette. I appreciate it.
Patrick McGivney with the Sustainability Group. The steady state model had predicted originally that we were going to get 17.5 inches of precipitation a year, and then you changed that to 17.3 inches of precipitation. A few months ago, I sent you a letter that had all the data from the Diablo Canyon Los Osos rain gauge they have that documented 10 years of rainfall, and their 10 years showed from 2011 to 2021 that there was a little over 12.73 inches of rainfall, not 17.3 inches of rainfall. So instead of getting 100% of your rainfall, and that's 17.3 is if you get 100% of the rainfall, you only got actually around 69% of the rainfall for that 10 years. So your sustainable yield would be off anyway. As you know, the sustainable yield is only an estimate, and definition given by the Department of Water Resources of a sustainable yield is that when pumping within the sustainable yield, there is no undesirable effect or results. Data show that there are still high chloride readings, an indication of seawater intrusion, which in itself is an indication of a basin in overdraft. According to meteorologists, we're in a La Nina cycle and will receive less rainfall this year with possible droughts to follow. In the technical memorandum of the Cleith Harris Group of 2017, it's pointed out that following the model, if annual rainfall would only be getting, in following the model, if we received 80% of the predicted rainfall, which is the estimated 17.3 inches right now annually, we would only be getting 13.84 inches of rain, which is probably more than what we'll actually get this year. But that would be with a sustainable yield at 1830 acre feet yearly. At 90%, that means if you got 15.57 inches of rain this year, the sustainable yield would be 21,110 acre feet yearly. We understand that you do not expect to be changing the sustainable yield frequently, but you are changing the modeling that helps set the sustainable yield, and you're wanting to approve a sustainable yield for 2025. So prudence is called for. Anticipating a drier year with possible drought years to follow, to be safe, a sustainable yield of 1,830 acre feet yearly, 80% of the predicted rainfall would be called for. If you want to be daring and hope for a 90% predicted rainfall of 200 of the 17.5 inches, then 2,110 acre feet would be the sustainable yield, but there is no data to show 2,300 acre feet would be safe or sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky McFarland. I want to thank you for the discussion on the Broderson Mound. I live right there below it. And yes, we were people who I'm taking out flood insurance because the talk about what was going to happen with all that water underground, it hasn't happened. And I think maybe the reason the mound isn't building so much is I've got a giant avocado tree I've watered 5 times in 20 years. So I'm thinking maybe we've got all of our gardens and things sucking up that water. So am I right in considering we're not hoping that mound will ever build past 50%? And if the mound, I mean, does it stay there? I know these are questions, not comment, but I'm really curious, where does that water go? Is it, we have a lot of underground streams and seeps around town. Is it just seeping off? Is that what's pushing nitrates over into S&T's water out of the horse properties and off of Cabrillo? It's fascinating to me, and I just appreciate any other comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no further public comment in the boardroom, and there's no public comment online.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, could
Yes.
I frame the conversation going forward here? There've been, within public comment, there were a number of observations that aren't technical information developed at the level that our hydrogeologist has developed the information that leads to the recommendation for the 2380 acre feet per year as sustainable yield. The assumptions and the estimates that go into that, including the rainfall, have been extensively vetted. I would suggest that, as the staff's presentation points out, nothing has changed in terms of new infrastructure coming on board. The questions regarding the history and the future of the Broderson Mound are interesting, but again have been folded into the technical analysis. And most importantly, coming shortly in a matter of months, will be a modeling program at the state of the art that is really what we should be using to take the next steps in confirming or adjusting, if necessary, the sustainable yield. So I would observe to my colleagues on the committee that we have gone over the inputs to the process by which we determine sustainable yield. We've held it constant over the past 3 years. For now, I think it is obvious that we have no reason to adjust it from where it is right now, but we should also commit as a first priority, once the transient model is available to do it, we should reevaluate that, and we can always make a change to the sustainable yield mid-year next year. So I would hope that we could move to approve staff's recommendation here, and look forward to revisiting it when we have the updated modeling technique and the ability to deal with projections into the future in a more sophisticated way.
Okay, thank you, Director Gibson, for that comment. Any other comments, discussion from the board members?
I will say I do agree with Supervisor Gibson on the point that we do have a transient model that is right around the corner. So I think our vote for this today is essentially just keeping the holding pattern of where we're at, because there's going to be data that is reflected in the transient model that will give us a lot more insight than we have currently. And I think that goes back to the 4 different sustainability metrics that Dan had mentioned. So outside of precipitation, I think that, the development of the Broderson Mound is of interest. I think as we move forward, and that's shown in the transient model, we'll definitely want to rely on the transient model to use that value to adjust our sustainable yield. And then the threshold of the seawater intrusion, we are talking about putting in new monitoring wells that are supposed to capture that data as well. So that should hopefully also be reflected eventually in the transient model. So I think today, I agree with keeping it the same, just for the mere fact that it's the best information we have currently. But definitely once the transient model is available, it could have an impact on what we do next.
Thank you. Yeah, I also agree with Director Gibson and Director Renicky about the modeling. I think it's an important tool. Once again, it is a model. These are models, estimate, predictions based on the best available information we have. And a lot of the dotted lines that were mentioned were predictions based on the information that we had. And just to point out, I think it was more of a visual to not expect dramatic change right out of the gates. I think everybody thought that there was going to be some changes that we'd see just the first year or second. This is going to take a long time and so I guess it just more or less gives us a visual to follow along with.
I'm sorry, Mark, it is a calculated value that our wastewater folks worked with Spencer on developing. It's not just a schematic. It is based on the understood dynamics of the basin.
Correct. In the very beginning of this, it was calculated through predictions. And, what I'm trying to point out is now we're down the road and we have values of, I think our biggest tool is monitoring wells, but the dotted line was a prediction, and that was predicted like before we even formed the BMC. I think that was part of the basin plan, right? I mean,
yes, correct.
We were talking about that early on. So
correct.
I think it just shows that we're following that, but we need to back it up with data. I think the modeling is our new improved modeling is going to help us with that. I think the additional monitoring wells, that's kind of why I was pointing out, do we need if Broderson's an important equation to our sustainable yield, do we need to look at another monitoring well at Broderson? I mean, what's going to be our next monitoring well? Because that to me is where we hit the data. We get samples, we see the, rubber hits the road at that point. So yeah.
I do want to say, I appreciate Lynette's comments. I think that the foundation of what we're doing here should be based on peer review. And in my opinion, what she's offering is a very good peer review of what we are trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to discount what she said. She had some really interesting points that will probably be, something we can apply and we can consider as we use a transient model going forward. So yeah, I mean, I understand that Supervisor Gibson is, saying we've done this, we went through this, but the essence of transient models is that they change. And so these dotted lines in that model may not be the same. And so, that is a prediction. That's kind of a hopeful prediction, and we hope it goes that way. But I think we are on the verge of having something that's really gonna give us more answers on that.
Yeah. Likewise, I appreciate this written format. I know it took a while to put together, and appreciate having it submitted to us. Dan, if we could put that up on our included in our agenda, I think that would be important so everybody can take a look at it.
Yeah, we'll add it to the website and in addition to the other agenda items.
And then I guess, along that, if there's questions that have not been answered that are new, I'm not opposed to ever looking at those, not just in this report, but through public comment. If there's things that we haven't addressed or looked at, but I generally agree with Director Gibson's comment that we spent 10 years developing the plan before this committee was together too. So there was a lot of very educated people that contributed to where we are today. So I am confident that we did have good peer review at that point, but if new things come up, but we should always, at the end of the day, it's models, estimates, and predictions, and we should always be questioning them.
And it's the nature of science. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to offer, I move that we pass staff's recommendation on keeping sustainable yield the same.
Can I have one more comment? So I know today this is not going to happen, but for, I think, future votes of this nature, anything involving our, scientific information, I would really like to have Spencer here, even if it's online, just so we can get questions and answers, because I think he's really the source of a lot of this information, and just being able to ask him a question directly that will clear the air, you know, immediately, rather than having it linger and go on as a, are we certain about, you know, certain things, just so we know, you know, the data and information's there. If we could have him, it would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, Spencer's definitely the technical expert in this arena, and he can answer questions much more readily than I can. And so, yeah, I think having him available for technical presentations and items would be valuable. And this is not to be a deterrent. I just, you know, that it's probably going to come at a cost, right? You know, Spencer's time is, you know, he's busy, and so, you know, we would want to be able to equitably compensate him for his attendance here. I don't think it would have to be a lot, but, you know, if we were going to want him to attend a number of meetings a year, maybe that's something we could ask him to include in his annual report proposal to do that. And but I agree. I think it would be valuable to be able to get sometimes these very technical questions more directly answered.
Yeah, and I think along with that, if we have new questions that come about, you know, it's, if we're asking the same question, and those questions are being answered, but we don't like the questions, I don't know if that's a reason to keep him coming back, right? But if we have new information that comes to the table, then we definitely want to have him weigh in on that new information.
I think it'd be worthwhile maybe working that into a budget, having him appear a couple times a year, and if needed, and if not needed, then we'll save some money that way.
Yeah. And doesn't he normally do that like on our annual report though? Isn't that the
Yes.
time when he comes and we can really dive into the details of what he's presenting in that report? Yeah. Okay, so I think we have a motion on the floor.
Before a second, I guess I would like to say that for a couple of years, we've been asked, and the community's been asked to be very patient with the development of the transient model and additional data from monitoring wells and that sort of thing, so we can be better informed about decisions. And I just wish in my own mind that everything could have been looked at as needing that kind of patience. Things are moving pretty fast right now, and I think that another year or two of data would have been good before we are facing some of the questions that we're going to be facing. But with that, I will second this motion.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
I
All opposed? All right, motion passes 4-0.
With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the accommodation and moving the action items up. I'm going to leave the meeting, as I think you can sustain a quorum. I've got miles to go yet today, and again, appreciate the chance to participate on those action items. We'll look forward to catching up with you next time. In the meantime, any specific questions or requests for comment, obviously don't hesitate to email me, and we'll engage that way.
Okay, thank you, Director Gibson. Wish you the best on your travels.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Okay, we'll resume the normal order of our agenda. We're item 7, public comment for items not appearing on the agenda.
If you have public comment and you are in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you are online, please raise your hand. We will take public comment in the boardroom first.
Hi, for the recording, Lynette Brooks again. This is where I meant to start today. So comment on the urban water use efficiency program. I mean, obviously it's a great thing, and it's probably, you know, at least slowed down or maybe temporarily halted the chloride intrusion. However, the updated basin plan, so the one published in 2015, says that the ultimate goal is to be able to get 2,100 acre feet per year at build out, which takes us right back basically to where you were when it wasn't sustainable. And somehow thinking that conserving water would help that. It doesn't. Conserving water actually just reduces the recharge that was going in. I mean, the septic tanks, if they didn't have nitrate, were a great source of recharge. Inefficient lawn irrigation is a great source of recharge. Now we're, not using so much in our house, and we've all converted to little drips on every plant, and it's all wonderful, but it doesn't let us pump more water. Also, the recharge is concentrated at select locations and not distributed evenly as it used to be with the septic systems and lawn watering. You're all worried about the Broderson Basin mound. And I'm going to talk about that on the next item because it will still fit in, I hope. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the lack of reports available on your webpage. I thank Jamie for sending me a bunch this morning, but there was no reason why those can't be on the webpage. If you read the annual report, if you read the basin plan, they keep referencing either Cleeth Harris reports or previous reports, and not being able to go back to those just hinders the public in understanding the whole system. So I think, there's no reason why anything that has been sent to you guys from a consultant should be publicly available. I don't know exactly what's been documented because I just got those today, but so far the stuff I've been able to read about the model doesn't document the model at all. I mean, it just says, here, we use it, here's an answer. I know nothing about the construction. I know nothing about the calibration. So it's just hard to kind of get an estimate for how good that model is and how it's being changed as these things change. My understanding is that it is updated annually, but still ran as a steady state model, but maybe I've got that whole understanding wrong. If that's true, then not putting in the pumping well is not actually conservative. Putting in the pumping well would create more stresses on the system and be more conservative as far as what is actually happening in the system. So I was a little confused about why not putting in the well that will be pumping soon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lindy Owen, I really appreciate having Lynette's fresh approach and her knowledge, because again, this is something that we've been looking at and things that we miss. Maybe she's catching, and it's exciting to see. I think all of us want our basin to be successful. So I wanted to know if we have any idea what that, I forgot what it was called, the electromagnetic thing that they flew over to read what our basin was. That was supposed to, was it November that we're going to see it, or have they just postponed getting the info to us? Because that's, I think, really important. I still am concerned that the attached basement that Mr. Gibson insisted had to be disconnected from our basin has something to do with our basin. And so we will not know those things until we get, more scientific information. And then I just kind of wanted to say the incentive to save money and be good to our basin and not be wasteful is pretty much disappearing in my life, and probably many other Los Osoans who had thought that we were trying to save a basin when actually it appears that we were just trying to allow the county to build more houses. So I'm not wasting water, but I really don't have the passion that I had. And it's all because the only, the reward that I got for my basin was that we'll have more people putting straws in, and we'll have more excuses about how a guest house doesn't use any water. And that's just, sorry, it's really hard for people that have had the passion and done all the hard work of installing everything to save every drop of water we could, to find out that it was all for naught.
Thank you. So many, Becky McFarland again, so many good comments and questions. I really enjoy hearing the public talking with people and finding out. For those that don't know, I'm an educator. I was an environmental and science educator for kids. A lot of this science is way above my head, but it has taken me 3 years to kind of know what's going on with this. And I have asked and asked for more simplified information for the general public. And maybe someday we'll get that. I do want those 13 people that are out there. Awesome. Do we normally get 13 people online listening in? Please come back to every one of these meetings. I do want people to know that I've started a petition, and it is in regards to guest houses, and people can roll their eyes and think it's dumb, but this is our last hurrah on one water saving measure. The guest houses I bring up at every meeting must be subject to that 1% growth. They need to be held to Title 19 retrofit to build. I mean, I've told people, someone in the county planning department is telling people these are the same as a granny unit. A granny unit is an ADU. These are not ADUs. They're being lived in full time. And it's been put upon us neighbors to have to think on our neighbors. And I don't appreciate that. A number of these have been put on lots that have been adjoined to existing lots. There's habitat being disturbed there. Some of them have been mowed down years ago, but some of these lots do have habitat. They should have to pay into the conservation fund. So I put this, it's up on change.org, and it's Los Osos Water and County Workaround. And so it's on change.org. I was at Farmers Market yesterday. I'll be there the next two. I plan on being at the next two board meetings. Talk to your board members and folks here. Some of you signed a letter quickly about the sustainability of our water and didn't feel comfortable with that. So board members, you could sign this petition, I think, I don't know, or have friends and family do that. But this is a Trojan horse. The LCP that there is says there's an unlimited number of these buildings that can be built. Unlimited. How many vacant lots can be adjoined to an existing lot, and a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home can be put on it with a giant garage, and it's not in the 1% growth, and unlimited. Thank you.
Patrick McGibney again with the Sustainability Group. Due process is what I'd like to discuss, or lack of it. We find ourselves back in 2016 when the sustainable yield was increased from 2,400 acre feet to 2,760. The court stipulated judgment allows a change in the sustainable yield, but following a very direct process to do so. It requires a major change to be discussed amongst the BMC, current data provided supporting the change, and unanimous vote to make the change. If you remember, the change was made by inserting the 2,760 acre feet yearly increase into the annual report on page 300 or something, and then approving the annual report, thus ostensibly approving the sustainable yield. No supporting data, no discussion. This was done at someone's direction. Cleith Harris Group wrote up the annual report and Dan Heimel's assistance, but who had it put in there in the first place? I believe the county had a hand in this. Increasing the sustainable yield to 2,760 decreased the basin yield metric to 74%, allowing the county, with a rationale of pumping within the sustainable yield, a reason to issue building permits. It has now happened again. The county has exercised their land use authority by pushing through the approval of the Los Osos community plan, starting with a 1% build out. This is a big policy change, again, contrary to the stipulated judgment and the basin plan, which calls for a supplemental water supply in order for build out. This first should have been presented to the BMC, supporting data reviewed and a vote taken with the unanimous vote needed for passage. Instead, the county took this directly to the Coastal Commission using data the Department of Water Resources says is neither an indication of nor proof of sustainability. And the county is now on their way of getting this passed and approved, completely bypassing process and the rest of the BMC. This should be a big concern for this committee, and I know it is for most of the community. The court has the court still has jurisdiction over this basin, and Mr. Gibson said any of you could contest this to the court if you are unhappy with or disagree with the process. Now is the time. You know the basin is not sustainable. We have no supplemental water supply, and you know both the extraction rates and sustainability yields are only estimates and do not indicate or prove sustainability. The county is not being transparent or collaborative with you. They do not have water users that depend upon a sustainable water supply, they have land use authority and they will use it at their own discretion. You have the court. Please use it. The community depends on you. Thank you.
There are no further public comments in the boardroom, and there are no public comments online.
Okay, thank you. We'll bring it back to the board. Any comments on public comment, Dan?
Yeah, there were a couple of questions that I think I'd like to address. The first comment was about some of the numbers in the basin plan. I mean, the numbers in the basin plan are dated. I mean, there's been a completely new community plan that's been proposed. The demand on a per capita basis is significantly different than it was estimated it was going to be in the time leading up to 2015 when the basin plan was developed. And so, yeah, it definitely warrants a review of those numbers. And, given that there's new information around projected water use per capita, and we also have new build out per capita population estimates under the new community plan. So, and the transient model and the water recycling funding program will help update some of those numbers. It'll be sort of the most comprehensive analysis around those future projections that has been done since 2015 or even before 2015. So there's an opportunity there. There was a comment about the septic discharge, not being concentrated. My understanding is that, that conversion from dispersed septic discharge to concentrated Broderson and Bayfield leach field discharge was evaluated in the modeling that was done for the basin plan in an attempt to because that is a significant change in how the water is being disposed of within the basin. Limited information on the steady state model. That's something we're looking to address. And so we can make those reports and documents available. I think one of the challenges is some of the work related to the steady state model was made or was performed during and for some of the parties to the adjudication. So we're going to need to evaluate how much of that how much of that information about the state model can be made and how much some of it may be held under attorney-client privilege of the parties. So that's just something that's going to take a little time for us to sort out with the legal counsel. But in the meantime, we'll make as much information as we can available on the model construction and calibration methods. There was a question about the not putting the well in the sustainable yield assumption not being conservative. And I just wanted to help clarify that. So this new well, this second program C well that is mostly constructed, once it's installed, it's not going to lead to increased production on the basin. It's going to lead to a shift in production in the basin to the eastern portion of the basin, which based on previous analysis is indicated is beneficial to basin health and would increase the sustainable yield utilizing the methodologies that we currently utilize. And so by not including it, it would result in a lower sustainable yield estimate than if we did include it using our current methodologies. There's a question about the AEM survey. I looked on the website. DWR has been saying Q3 2024. We're in Q4 2024 now. So unfortunately, it's a little delayed. And then there was a comment about 2760 being adopted. I guess there were, I will just acknowledge that in the past, there were adoptions of a sustainable yield estimate that was done as part of the annual monitoring report. That is something that we addressed significantly in 2021 when we adopted the updated sustainable yield estimate. We did that as a separate item with a separate vote that required unanimous approval to address some historical processes that may or may not have met the full requirements of the stipulated judgment. And So I just want to clarify that, you know, we're no longer adopting the sustainable yield as part of the annual report. It's separate, requires unanimous approval as is required by the stipulated judgment. And those are the questions that I had noted.
Thank you, Dan. Just thinking about, we keep talking about the model, and so yeah, we had a schedule for the model. We haven't met the model. I don't think we're getting good feedback on why we're so far behind on the model. I understand it's a complicated process, and is it a workload? Is it a lack of information? I know, you know, just from waterworks projects, our materials holding everything up on all of our jobs. So I got a reason why I'm behind on all my capital improvement projects, but this one, it's fully funded. I think we have it. What, you know, maybe we could have a good understanding of that coming back. Like, where are we? What do we, let's get a schedule out there that has some timelines to it. And if those timelines aren't being met, you know, we have some, you know, we'll look for reasons why that's not being met, but we're just making huge decisions. And it just keeps coming back up that when that model's available. And I think we really need to push, ultimately need to push Spencer. Sorry, Spencer, if you're listening, but we need that model, I think, is probably going to be one of the most important things we have coming in 2025.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with Spencer today, and he, like I said, he's in the calibration process. You know, Spencer has his heart and soul invested in this model, and you know, he basically asked me at this point, you need to tell me when I'm done, because otherwise I'm going to keep calibrating and keep tuning and trying to make this as best as I possibly can, because I know how important it is for the basin and for the BMC. And so you know, my task, I need to look at the grant deadlines and some other things. And I also indicated, let me talk to the parties and the board and, you know, get that input. You know, how do we balance speed versus accuracy? And, you know, and so at a certain point, so I mean, this is good input. This is, I can talk with staff and we can talk with them. But, you know, in essence, the calibration has been done, to my understanding, it's been done to industry standard. Could it be better? Yes. And, you know, could he make it better? That's what he's working on. But at a certain point, you know, you do just have to stop. That's kind of where we are. I can bring back more information on that at a future meeting once I look at the grant requirements and talk with the other party staff representatives. But I did want to convey that, you know, it is being actively worked on with the intent of providing a better quality product, best quality product that we can.
And I think that's good information for us to have, but it would really be good at this point, I think, to have Spencer come and give us at least what he has and doesn't have and what his questions are. I mean, are we at that point? Because I know Spencer does strive for perfection. He does a good job. He fully understands that this thing's going to be peer reviewed and picked apart in every direction. And I'm sure that's some of his hesitation, but if there's a way that he could come and give us at least an update from his words and technical expertise of, here's where I am with the model, here's my challenges today that I'm working on, and here's what you can expect to see in the future. Maybe we could agendize that for another meeting or something.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo basically everything that Chair Zimmer just said. I agree. I mean, I'm really eager to see this thing. I'm super curious to see what's in it. I want to know kind of what the outputs are. I mean, it'll be very interesting and I think eye-opening for all of us to see our basin in that light. So again, I just agree and I would love to see him here maybe as soon as November. I don't know if that's too soon, but I think it would be really helpful.
Yeah, I agree too. It's not quite as simple as give me your confidence level, Spencer. Are you at 98% of everything that you could have and possibly want to put into this? Is it 92? It's not that simple. But if we could ask those questions about what are the gaps, what are the things that are causing you heartburn, then we could have an understanding maybe of what his problems are and make decisions about whether they're really, I don't know, if we share them or not. But yeah, let's see what he thinks about that.
And I think part of the project included a peer review section. And so, now maybe it's the time to figure out, I don't know if we have the platform for what that peer review. Is it going to be something we're going to contract out and go out for a bid on that? I mean, is it time to at least start organizing that? Because I'd hate to get to a point and then say, well, we can't release it yet. It has to be peer reviewed. Now we got to go through a 3-month process to secure the contractor for that. So, maybe there's somebody we can get on board now that helps Spencer evaluate the where he's at today and help move that along.
I have one last question on that. So with the transient model, you were doing like subcommittee meetings, right, on the staff level?
There's there's a peer review consultant, and we formed a technical advisory committee of BMC party staff representatives to participate in key milestones and review deliverables associated with the project. And so, yeah, both of those mechanisms are in place to, support and vet, the work that's being done. And that we really have been waiting for the calibrated model as the kind of the next milestone for that technical advisory committee to engage and the peer review consultant to have something substantive to review. And so, yeah, again, that's just kind of that. What we're working towards is that milestone. And so, but I'm hearing that we want an update on the project, and let's see what we've got, and and at least to be able to help share with the BMC and the public the work that's being done, and outline where we are and where we need to get to and what are the next steps. And I think is what I'm hearing, to bring this back as a substantive business item to the BMC.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so public comment, we're going to go ahead and close this item. And we'll move on to item 8, Executive Director's Report. I think there's a section on the modeling. You can probably gloss over that in your report, Dan.
Yes, thank you, Chair Zimmer. So yeah, item 8, not a lot of updates that we haven't already covered and I guess that's one of the challenges of switching the order of it. Yeah, the modeling progresses as and we're targeting calibration, this fall with drafts available in the winter of 2025. We talked about the grant. We talked about the AEM survey, talked about the sustainable yield estimate. We talked about the basin monitoring program improvement, and we haven't talked to about the basin metric evaluation, but I think we have talked about that in the past. That is something the BMC has expressed interest in seeing updated recommendations on the metrics. And that is a sort of just a competing priorities, bandwidth issue is, but we should be able to bring that back soon as well, because a lot of that work has been done, but that does require some of Cleith Harris's time as well. There are updates to the land use planning process section of the executive director report, really focused around the community plan and the growth management framework, description of the town hall, and also the upcoming Board of Supervisors meeting on October 29th to consider acceptance of Coastal Commission's recommendations on the community plan, establish the growth rate and the protocols for implementing the wait list. There is also an update. October 8th, the Board of Supervisors passed a motion to separate the Los Osos Habitat Conservation Plan implementation item from the October 29th hearing item. And so that it can be brought back to the Board of Supervisors, as I understand it, at a future date, just specifically the habitat conservation plan piece. And got updated wastewater, recycled water, delivery information. One thing to highlight here is the county is making progress towards getting the schools, primarily Loams, Monarch Grove, and then also the community park connected to the recycled water system, which will provide a significant benefit to water resources in the Los Osos Basin, as those users currently provide on purveyor lower aquifer pumping water. And then, yeah, we talked about the second program C, Los Osos CSD Bay Oaks well. So yeah, that concludes my executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions before we move to public comment? No. Okay, we'll move to public comment at this time.
If you have public comment and you're in the boardroom, please come up to the podium. And if you are online, please raise your hand. We will take public comment in the boardroom first.
Thank you. Patrick McGibney with the Sustainability Group. In the director's report under the area of Sigma, it does say in there that Sigma sees us as a low priority basin. And that's because we have a basin management plan and a basin management committee. So they don't have to worry about our basin. You're supposed to be taking care of it. But they also say we are still in critical overdraft. So my question for each one of you, Mark and Chuck and Beth, do you think our basin is sustainable right now for more growth? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynette Brooks. I wanted to talk a little more about the update on the recycling project and expand on this whole Broderson Mound discussion. I did read the report says it's 50% developed, and it took me a while to realize that meant how high they think it's going to get, not how much water is being dumped in. So I guess it's taking as much water as it's planned for. Okay. The annual report also says that mound seems to be stabilizing. As Beth said, it's been that same for 3 years now. So apparently it's the mound height may have been overestimated. Someone said we can't keep changing the model for the mound height. You don't change the model for the mound height. The amount of water being applied is what's in the model. The mound height is a model output. So I would like to know how that model is showing that height versus what is being measured there. If it really is only 50%, I mean, what really matters for the basin is the amount of water. It's not how high that mound is, unless you're really planning on the whole, we're going to stop saltwater intrusion by having a mound at the coast, as they do, but that's usually done with injection wells. And you have to put in more water than you pump out of the system, or you still end up going to the ocean, changing the gradient to the ocean and having saltwater intrusion. So there seems to be something maybe inconsistent with what was thought about the mound and what is reality about the mound. So that needs to be cleared up maybe in the next annual report. The other thing is about the Los Osos community plan. I don't know how much power you guys have at the supervisors meeting, but that plan should not be approved until the transient model is done, calibrated, reviewed, used to predict long-term effects of full development under different climate scenarios. 10 years of drought, what's going to happen? Until the airborne electromagnetic survey is completed, but until the report is available. Until the new monitoring wells, LA 14 and 16 are completed. They should actually be turned into multi-layer monitoring wells if possible by putting 2 PVC pipes down each of them with bentonite in between them. And that way you're getting more information from the same existing well. And incorporation of new monitoring wells into the basin metric. Saltwater intrusion can be caused by rising levels of saltwater below freshwater, even if the wells are farther from the coast. Monitoring wells near the new wells in the lower aquifer and in the upper aquifer needs to be added to the chloride network and the water level network. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky McFarland. I'm glad to hear, I think, that the metrics, the basin metrics are going to be looked at. But I am concerned. And this goes back to the town hall where Mr. Gibson told me that the 20% buffer we have reserved for like emergencies was basically it sounded like we just came up with that. I found that disconcerting, and I don't think I hope that's not how it was just come up with, because the 1% growth is eating into that 20%. Also, I've asked before, have these annual reports been peer reviewed? And I was told by Mr. Gibson that yes, the BMC peer reviews these, but there are no hydrogeologists on the BMC. There's fine people. I like all of you people, but I think it deserves a true peer review. This is a big deal and a complicated subject. So I hope for the best, and thank you.
Lindy Owen, I am just really having a hard time understanding how long the county can take to actually get the gray water out to the schools. This is what we're going to 8 or 9 years now, when it was all supposed to be part of the original program. It was all supposed to happen. I'm not sure if the county is funding this, if it comes out of our bill that we pay for processing the wastewater. But again, when that water is not being used for the lower aquifer, and it should be coming from the upper aquifer, I don't even understand that insanity. But if we save that water in the lower aquifer, is that part of what is considered our sustainable yield at this point? Because it isn't, I mean, if the county wants to take another 5 years, they probably will. I mean, I've watched this thing just poke itself, poke along slowly. So I'm a little discouraged. On 10th Street, there's supposed to be a place where you could deliver to the public for different projects that the community might need. It's been sitting closed, built, but closed for, again, 8 years. So this whole idea of our fabulous modern sewer was all based on recycled water, and very little of it's being used except for an experiment up on Broderson. And it is an experiment. We don't know what that water's doing. I contest that we would like to, I think we should be looking down below in that lower section of lower aquifer to see if there's salt water in it. Because if there is, this whole thing is a big waste. So anyway, my thoughts.
Right, we have no further public comment in the boardroom, but we do have one online. Lynette, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Hello, Lynette Tornotsky, Los Osos. I would just like to thank each of you in staff and on the panel up there. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. I know it's not easy. I can see how not easy it is by watching public comment. So I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. You've worked long and hard, and there are those of us out here who actually appreciate what you do. Thank you.
We have no further public comment. One more public comment in the boardroom.
Hi, I didn't intend to comment. My name is Rhett Brooks, retired civil engineer. Worked 18 years as a consultant, married to Lynette Brooks. Like Lynette said, we've only been here for a while. And when we moved here, we were very impressed with the water management plan that has been developed for the area. And this is not, we came from Utah. This is not something that would have been done in Utah. The city and the county have been very farsighted about this. They've been very, very diligent about pursuing this. And honestly, we're just we're just truly impressed with what you've done. I just have a couple of comments. One is the peer review. If you of the transient model, if you could, I suggest that you work with the county and possibly the state to see if you could get a peer review from somebody like the U.S. Geological Survey, who are truly the experts in hydrologic transient models, and see if they would take a look at it, or see if, you know, certainly in Lynette, there are other retired hydrogeologists from the USGS who have extensive groundwater modeling experience. They may be able to assist with it as well. And then, but I think that's the end of my comments. So just please do a very extensive peer review, not necessarily just with a consultant, but with people who actually can dig into this and look at it from a great amount of detail. Thank you.
Good.
We have no further public comment or online in the boardroom.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the board.
Yeah, there were a couple of kind of questions or clarifications. Yeah, so I may have made a comment about adjusting the mound height in the model. You know, as not being a groundwater model, they may have mischaracterized that. To be honest, maybe that is modifying the amount of flow that's going in there that then adjusts the mound height. But basically, it's my understanding is making changes to better mimic conditions representative of a Broderson mound that only has built up 50% of the anticipated height that it would build up at full development. There was a comment about trying to make LA 14 and 16 the modification zoned into multiple lower aquifer formations, presumably zone D and zone E. And you know, so I talked to Spencer Harris about this. We the one well is only a 6-inch diameter well, and so it doesn't seem we don't think that it could accommodate more than one pipe. Sorry, what's the right term? But you know, more than one separate casing to be zoned in multiple aquifers. The other well is a larger diameter well, but the concern is, and similar to the concern that we've seen in other wells that we have, is the potential for borehole leakage in the sort of around in the external in the casing that would basically lead to potentially less representative water quality values for the aquifers that we're looking at. And so it's the concern and then the struggle that we have had with the Rosina well, where we're definitely seeing an upper aquifer water leak down into the lower aquifer and limited our ability to get representative water quality samples for the lower aquifer at that well. It is partially due to this concern that when we constructed the skyline monitoring well, we didn't do what we call a nested monitoring well. There are two separate wells located approximately 25, maybe 50 feet apart. One screened in zone D, one screened in zone E. And so that's just that. And then also we're limited to the screened intervals for the production wells that are there already as another potential limitation when we're looking at where to screen. So that was the basis of the recommendations for LA 14 and 16 only being screened in zone E. More wells in the metrics. That was another comment. That is something that is being contemplated in the update of the metrics. So I think we'll see that coming back in the updated metrics. There was a question about recycled water to schools. Who pays for that? I mean, this is the county owns and operates the wastewater system, the recycled water system. The county, so you know, the wastewater customers pay for the costs of those systems. However, it's my understanding that most of those connections have been grant funded through the ARPA program. So hopefully the impact of those connections are negligible or none to the wastewater system customers because of the ability, the county's ability to access grant funding to pay for those connections. The recycled water connections are not considered in the sustainable yield estimate currently. So the fact that, well, these connections that haven't been made aren't being factored in. And even once the connections are made, it won't change the estimate of sustainable yield, but what presumably it will do, it will change the estimated production. Well, our estimates of production will decrease because we will no longer be providing groundwater for these irrigation uses. We will be providing recycled water. Inadvertently, that'll be less water going to Broderson. So, you know, maybe there's a change there. I mean, it's a kind of a closed system. So, and it is based on our current knowledge, putting recycled water to offset production of lower aquifer groundwater is the highest and best use we have for that water. And I think that was it for the questions.
Okay. Any further comments from board members?
I like the suggestion of potential state or federal agency peer reviewing the transient model. It might come at no cost. I don't, if they have a branch for that kind of thing. I have no idea. But that possibility maybe should be explored.
Something we can look at. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can get contacts for people that I have. I would want to just make sure we balance it with the other sort of comments we heard today about schedule.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. That's primary.
Yeah. So we'll have to evaluate, you know, how quickly something like that could be done and what are our constraints with terms of the grant agreement. And then also, you know, how soon the BMC wants to see results from the model.
Yeah, I think we have some funding available for the peer review. We have a line item for that.
We do, yeah. So when we selected the team, you know, for this, we selected a lead, you know, modeling or hydrogeo firm to develop the model. And then we also selected a separate peer review hydrogeologic consultant to participate in the process, that technical advisory committee and review process.
But overall, I do like that suggestion, just even somebody
Somewhere along
outside.
the line, it would be a good idea, maybe, particularly if it came at no cost, because the agency had devoted a division to that.
Yeah, yeah. And even somebody that could review the model itself outside of Los Osos that doesn't have, you know, an attachment to either emotionally or financially to Los Osos. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both your comments on that. And I mean, I would assume even like USGS would want to have our model available for themselves. I mean, because this is important information about, you know, the hydrogeology of our area. So I mean, it may come at very little cost for them to just have that data and that information. Going back to the comment, I actually think the idea of having any of these monitoring wells checking multiple levels or zones in the aquifers, I think it's a really good idea. And I'm curious, you said there's potential for borehole leakage, but I think Lynette had mentioned using bentonite. So isn't that typically the way that we would kind of seal off the different zones? And is that not an option for these monitoring wells?
Yeah, so my understanding, bentonite slurry is sort of the proposed material to separate the zones. I think the concern is that even with the bentonite slurry, there's the potential for leakage when you are trying to cram more pipes inside a pipe. There's just more potential pathways. You know, not a monitoring well design expert, but yeah, I mean, I did ask a question. The logic was, yes, I mean, it's obvious it's great to collect as much data as we can within each well, but we potentially might be compromising the data that we're going to get by trying to ask this well to do too much. I mean, the other thing that I think we obviously need to take into account is, you know, what other monitoring wells do we have in that vicinity? And so, you know, in the vicinity of LA 14 and 16, I don't think I have the graphic in my slideshow. We have the newly constructed Skyline monitoring well, which has dedicated Zone E and Zone D monitoring locations. We have the Quest by the Sea monitoring well, which the BMC constructed in 2019, which has, I believe that one is nested, Zone D and Zone E, but was a new constructed well, so there was sufficient, you know, casing diameter to accommodate that. We've got the Palisades well, which is nearby, that's screened in Zone D. And so those, as I understand it, that was logic for just targeting Zone E in that area.
Retrofits, I mean, they're
Yeah.
just, it's not new construction, so you don't always get what you'd ideally have.
Right. Mhm. And that was the primary data gap, was Zone E too. We just didn't have that information there, right? I mean, that was.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got, well, like I said, there's a number of Zone D wells in that area. Palisades was a Zone DE combo. It was actually sleeved off to now it's only a Zone D well to help prevent seawater intrusion. But yeah, I believe that one of the key data gaps is Zone E in that area of historic seawater intrusion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dan, for the executive director's report and the comments. We'll close item 8, and we've already taken care of item 9 for those that joined us later. Took care of those earlier in the meeting. We'll move to item 10, adjournment. So call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the attendance. Go Dodgers.
Go Dodgers.